Great, thanks everyone, and glad to be here. I'm going to speak to you today about our novel treatment for acute episodes of atrial fibrillation. We use a drug called flecainide, which has been on the market for a few decades as a prophylactic treatment that is taken either orally or delivered acute via IV outside of the U.S. It's not available in the U.S. for that. And what we are doing is we are developing a novel formulation to treat acute episodes of AFib. We have a lot of progress to report. We have a very solid preclinical foundation, both PK, PD, and toxicology. We've completed a phase 1 in 40 healthy volunteers. This work was done in Australia, and we actually have another phase 1 with a slightly higher dose that we're completing now. We have very exciting clinical evidence for the potential for a very low effective dose, low with respect to the current doses used prophylactically. And we have very strong support from experts and KOLs in the field, both from the point of view of top electrophysiologists who are the leading advisors around the world, as well as practicing physicians who are interventional cardiologists, general cardiologists, and emergency department physicians. We've had some positive interactions with the agency with respect to this concept. I think there's particular excitement about the fact of using this on an acute basis with a lower dose to treat and then quickly resolve the symptoms. We have very strong IP portfolio and additional applications around this. We have actually recently expanding our exclusivity, not just from a patent perspective, but also with other strong protections. And we've been very fortunate to have a very strong syndicate of leading investors. Our Series B, which was oversubscribed, we announced last year, was led by Sofinova and HealthCap, and Deerfield and Morningside, who led our Series A, also came in. We are currently undergoing a phase 2 trial that is occurring in 2 countries in Europe. It's an open-label, dose-ranging feasibility and proof of concept to actually see if we can see an efficacy signal, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. We'll be expanding that to the U.S. Later this year, and I'll have more details on that. The global burden of AFib is quite significant. There are over 30 million patients worldwide with this disease, 6 million in the U.S., 2 million, this is going backwards, sorry about that. 6 million in the US, 10 million in Europe, and 1 million in Japan. It's a progressive disease. So the first stage is called paroxysmal, and that's where we're starting to address this patient population, with about 30 to 35% in each category. So the first stage, actually, what happens is the condition, the episode will resolve within minutes, or hours or days. The definition of paroxysmal is that it self-resolves within 7 days. About 8 to 10% of that bucket of patients actually progress to the next stage, which is called persistent. And at that point, intervention is required to stop the episode. And ultimately, many or most of these patients progress to the permanent form of atrial fibrillation in which no intervention will resolve it. And a lot of older patients with AFib are in a permanent state of the condition. AF causes about 15 to 20% of all ischemic strokes, and in addition causes a number of other problems. So, for example, in many cases leads to heart failure. The result of the fact that this disease is not well treated leads to a $30 billion spend in the US alone annually to treat the disease directly and also to treat the other conditions that occur because of the persistence of the disease. So it's a very high unmet need because right now the current options are inadequate. So for an acute treatment, right now what patients are given, they'll either sit and wait for the episode to pass, and as I mentioned, it could be days. In many cases, they've given up going to the ER because what they'll get is they'll get rate control and sent home. And the rate control will reduce the rapid heart rate, but it doesn't resolve the symptoms of arrhythmia. So the patients are still dizzy and debilitated, and they know actually that they're at risk of stroke. In some cases, after a few days, they'll go in for electrical cardioversion if they still haven't resolved. And in EU, as I mentioned earlier, IV therapies are available, and in other countries as well, but not in the US. But that requires a visit to the ER or to the clinic or the hospital to get that delivered. There is also not too frequent use of what's called pill in the pocket. So it's taking an oral dose, a large loading dose of the currently available drugs that are used prophylactically. And the problem is that hasn't been well studied. It requires a large dose. It doesn't necessarily work very quickly. It could take an hour, 2, or multiple hours. And there's no good guidance on that because it's never been studied with large randomized control trials. And from a prophylaxis perspective, I mentioned that chronically antiarrhythmics are used. They're not well tolerated, requires daily doses. They're limiting side effects, and in many cases, a patient will be taking this 365 days a year for episodes that might occur 8, 10, 15 times. And so an alternative would be to take something that could resolve it just those 10 or 15 times and not have to take these drugs every day. So in many cases, there's breakthrough episodes, and they move to another drug, or they give up, and then they proceed to more interventional therapies like an ablation. Now, in the case of an ablation, this is obviously an invasive procedure. The technologies are improving, but often several repeat procedures are required, and it obviously is not without its own risks. So as a result of all of this, patients are very frustrated. They're terrified. This is a terrifying condition, and they're very well aware of the dangers of this disease. And when we talk to them, they say, why haven't they come up with something in this day and age? Why isn't there something I can take that can resolve this and not lead to all these other problems? So right now, there are no drugs available or treatments on the horizon, approved treatments, well-studied treatments, that could allow patients to rapidly initiate their own conversion and have that be resolved in minutes. So the ideal profile would be something that could do exactly that, that could rapidly restore normal heart rate and rhythm in minutes, relieve the symptoms, and reduce hospitalization and ER visits, which total more than 1 million each year in the US alone. And we want something that's obviously safe and effective for both under medical supervision and out of that. So our solution is called InRhythm, and it's, as I mentioned before, inhaled formulation of flecainide that's delivered through a breath-modulated inhaler that's available globally right now. This is not our device. We're partnering with a device maker. And when this formulation is inhaled, and we've optimized the particle size distribution so that it gets distributed very quickly throughout the lung, it gets absorbed through the pulmonary vein and into the left atrium within minutes. So what we see both from our PK studies and our canine studies is that Cmax can happen in as little as a minute or 2 after the drug has been delivered, which only takes a few minutes. So our target product profile is a drug that can be delivered and initiated very soon after you have an episode, anywhere you are, so either in the hospital or on your own as a patient. And that's very rapidly effective and accurate and efficient and reliable with this advanced inhaler. We expect very high efficacy. We know that the sooner you treat an episode after onset, the much higher the efficacy at a same dose. And so our technology and approach would enable that. And this will obviously greatly improve the quality of life, and it will be safer and better tolerated. That's what we're aiming for and what we're seeing so far, because it is a low dose and you're just using it when you need it. It will reduce these healthcare costs that I talked about. And what's really exciting is the availability of technologies that we're not developing ourselves, but other companies like Apple and AliveCor and many others are developing for mobile wearables and ECG measurements, which will only increase the diagnosis of the disease and allow patients to measure their heart rate and rhythm before and after treatment. And longer term, we don't need to do the studies now to demonstrate this, but it's well understood that if you can intervene every time, that you will slow the progression of the disease. You'll reduce the need for chronic therapy, both antiarrhythmics as well as anticoagulation, which is something that's really needed right now to reduce the risk of stroke. And we hope to reduce the risk of stroke by treating it early and reducing the progression of the disease. So in our canine model, which is the gold standard of, sorry, this is not going back, the gold standard of models for antiarrhythmic drug development, we've seen that when you deliver the drug via intratracheal instillation, which is the next best thing to inhale, it's hard to get the dogs to inhale the device, so we do intratracheal instillation. It resolves within minutes. In this case, this particular dog resolved in 12 seconds after delivery of a minute, and it's very, very fast. So our overall clinical development program, as I mentioned, we completed an initial phase 1. We have a second one now that is actually looking at a slightly higher dose. We've completed the first part of our phase 2A, which is an open label dose ranging study I'll talk about in a minute. And we're going to expand that with a higher dose and then do a double-blind placebo-controlled study and also expand that to the US. And the phase 3 will do 2 main studies. One would be the in-hospital or medically supervised, and the other will be out of hospital. And so for the medically supervised, for both of our phase 2 and the first part of our phase 3, we're looking at patients presenting in the ER or the clinic with symptoms. For the out of hospital, we will give that to patients who have presented once under a medical supervised condition situation, and then they can take the device and drug home, and for the next episode, take care of it that way. So just very quickly, in the interest of time, our phase 1, we did a single double-blind randomized placebo-controlled single ascending dose study where we looked at 20, 40, and 60 milligrams. Keep in mind that a daily dose of prophylaxis of flecainide may be 100 or 150 or 200 milligrams, so this is quite a bit lower. And the IV dose is 150 for conversion. So we started with lower doses just to make sure that we could deliver this safely. And we saw nice dose proportional PK and PD. The PD is mild QRS widening, which is indicative of effective myocardial delivery of the drug. And what you want to see is slight widening that's consistent with a level that you see when patients have converted with other formulations of the drug. And then you see in our case, it resolves quite nicely shortly thereafter. And that's what you want to see. You want it in and out. You want the impact there, an on-off switch, reset the heart, and then get out of your system. And the pulmonary and CV safety that we've seen so far is very, very good. So that's good news. Obviously, you want to look at pulmonary function, and you want to see the typical CV safety issues that you may see with some of these drugs. We didn't see any of that at the doses we've tested so far, and the inhalation was quite tolerable. So the phase 2 study design, as I mentioned, it's patients presenting in the ER with episodes. We did single and repeat doses of flecainide, one set of 30, and in some cases a repeat dose. And then we're looking at feasibility, the whole process of the patients coming in, measuring the PK, making sure they're stable in AF for about an hour, and then delivering the drug and seeing if they resolve. And then we looked at safety, tolerability, and conversion rate, and we're expanding that to look at 90 milligrams next. And the good news is we have a very promising start. We are seeing efficacy. We're seeing no drug-related SAEs. We're seeing dose-dependent conversion. And I show an example from one patient. And so we're going to continue that dose escalation. And we actually have some exciting technical and operational enhancements to be able to greatly improve the speed of the delivery. And then we'll initiate U.S. sites by second half of 2019. The CMC is quite low risk. It was the room temperature stable formulation that we do with standard sterile fill finish process in single dose pre-filled syringes. And then the device we use for the delivery is called the AeroEclipse, the company called Trudel. It's breath actuated. It works very, very well, precise and accurate dosing. It's commercially sold worldwide, so we're reducing regulatory risk by not trying to do device development ourselves, but going with something that's well established, easy to use and portable, and either plugs into medically compressed air, as you see the nebulizer, or has a portable compressor that you can carry around in a kit. The market research we've done is quite favorable. So we've spoken to both cardiologists as well as emergency room physicians, and they're all very excited about it and very, very positive about it. They recognize the key target product profile benefits, and they're most excited about the fact that this will likely be very high efficacy for everything that I mentioned in terms of treating quickly and straight to the heart, rapid conversion and reduction in all the healthcare utilization, and very easy to use. We envision being able to use this in a wide range of settings, so not just medically supervised, not just emergency room in hospital, but also maybe skilled nursing facilities, home health nurses. And then the second indication for patient-led cardioversion, you could use it anywhere, travel with it, have it in your bag or in the office or in the car. And because these episodes are unpredictable and quite debilitating, you want to have it nearby. So even if you've left home to go grocery shopping and you left it at home, you just head back home and treat, and it's much better than having to go to the ER or wait it out. I mentioned the availability of all these wearables, portables, and implantable ECGs. That will really increase awareness of the disease and awareness of actual episodes, and so that will benefit us greatly. And we've done quite a bit of pharmacoeconomics, and we believe this is a conservative forecast at peak revenues. This doesn't even include the advances in exclusivity that we've announced recently, and that it also, we've done some payer research and it has been received quite favorably so far, and I do think there's quite a bit of upside on this. We will be finishing our phase 2 in early 2020 and go into a proof of concept on the patient-led side, and then our phase 2, phase 3 studies with the availability of being able to complete the first NDA submission by 2022, and then go on from there for the patient-led indication. So in summary, this will be a transformative medical strategy for treating acute episodes of PAF. It's highly differentiated, very significant unmet medical need with a unique way of addressing it. Strong data so far, strong support from the key opinion leaders and all the experts, a very strong value proposition for patients, physicians, and payers, and a strong IP portfolio. We were actually featured on the cover of BioWorld a couple of weeks ago to talk about our expanded IP and the use of this with some of these devices. Very strong team. And we, as I mentioned, we raised our Series B. We'll be going out later this year for our next round of financing to take us through the first phase 3. And so you can find more information on our website or follow us on Twitter or LinkedIn, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.